coverage of the vanishing islands of Sundarbans in the Bay of Bengal, and the PANOS South Asia Media Excellence Award for her insightful reportage on of climate change and associated challenges. She has been a British Evening Scholar, a Robert Bosch Fellow, an IREX UNESCO Fellow, and a Kavli Prize Media Scholarship Awardee. Shubhra continues to serve on many international committees and meetings on science communication, environment, health, and climate change. Through Nature India's many workshops and outreach activities, she trains Indian scientists in science communication and presentation skills. I personally look up to Shubhra and her work as a role model in the field of science communication in India. And I really think all of you are very lucky to be selected for this workshop and to be attending this talk. So we are also streaming this live on YouTube for to reach it out to a larger audience. Shubhra, over to you.
Many thanks, Sarunita, and many thanks for having me here. Always a pleasure to, interact with people like yourself and enthusiasts of science communication, whoever wants and needs and requires science communication in their daily life and aspires to do a good job of it. So, in very short, I would say, let's begin with the premise that storytelling is one of the most effective, captivating, and useful forms of communication, any sort of communication. When you start weaving a story around something, it immediately jumps out to you. It could be the toughest concepts in science. It could be you telling your children something that they are not understanding pretty well, but if you weave a story around it, it sort of sugar coats, if you will. I mean, that's not the analogy I would use for science stories, but it does coat it with a veneer which makes it even more desirable or readable or communicable or understandable for that matter. So that's the premise I'll be starting with today. And I intended it to be more of a workshop, not a talk, but maybe that can come sometime later for people who are interested. So today I'll just give you the very brief idea about what, as the topic says, perspective writing is. What does it mean in scientific or popular terms about when you say I'm going to write a perspective, I'm going to address a tough science issue with in a style that doesn't really doesn't really resonate just with the scientific community, but with a larger, wider audience. So let me just very quickly bring up today's topic, that is perspective writing. I hope my screen is visible because I can't see any of you. So just, okay, cool.
It's visible.
All right. So perspective writing, what many people might call perspective is, in my limited understanding from where I come from, the way we deal with this subject is, it could be called variously. You could call it, a commentary, an opinion piece, piece where you're expressing your views, that is a point of view, but has a solid, for scientists, it has a solid science or evidence-backed narrative. So perspective writing for scientists is something that has a solid backbone of science and at the same time is a very popular format of writing or communicating. So very text heavy slide, which I don't like too much, but well, let's get some perspective. Let's get all of what we are going to discuss today right there in one slide and in one go. What is a perspective? What is a commentary? What is a review, for instance? Or what is something that we call an opinion piece? It is a non-technical piece which doesn't have too much jargon, which is not strictly your scientific manuscript. It is a piece that comes in the ambit of news or feature articles or review, or, as I said, a point of view. It is mostly written like a newspaper opinion editorial to engage, persuade, or inform, and sometimes also entertain. So you could say a satire is a form of perspective. An opinion piece is which engages the audiences or readers actually is a form of perspective. Similarly, something that persuades you to take action and also informs you about the latest worldview on the subject could be a perspective. It basically sets a very practical agenda. It is not nebulous or ambivalent. It just goes ahead and calls a spade a spade. It takes a very broad outlook into the subject that is in question, but at the same time, it is taking the debate or the discussion forward on that subject. It also, of course, dwells briefly on the past research or history, which you, in your parlance, might understand as a review. So it takes into account what has happened on this subject in its previous avatars, but at the same time, it doesn't go very, very deep into that so that it leaves space and willingness of the reader and excitement of the reader to look forward to what's new on the subject. It talks of the present trends, as we just discussed, but makes informed estimates for the future. What would be this subject or this discipline or this particular point of view looking like in, say, 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, or later in the future? All of those things come into play, and something that you might call implications of research or science in your terms also comes into play into a perspective piece. Of course, there have to be no competing interests or endorsements inside a perspective piece unless really, really needed in that piece. So we have to be very, very sure about what we are writing and how we are presenting it so that it doesn't come across as something that is driving my own personal agenda or the agenda of my own personal institute or academy or whatever affiliations I have. It shouldn't be in your face endorsement. But the most important thing about a perspective, and we'll learn about it a little more when we discuss the difference between an academic manuscript and a perspective piece, is it is human. It is not your cut and dry writing, as many of you might have experienced during in your academic careers. You write about things in a very cut and dry manner, which doesn't leave too much room for the human element to creep in. It's not your problem, it's a problem of how we handle manuscripts, how we write, traditionally write our the scientific jargon laced communication. So a perspective has a lot of human elements to offer. It can be emotional, but as I said, backed with science. It can use strong sentiments, again backed with science. And so an example of what I am saying is right there on your screens. Why India must tackle the double burden of COVID-19 and TB urgently. So, coming from an academic, this would look like more of a review of articles that have recently appeared around the subject, or the science that sort of looks at the convergence of these two, COVID-19 and TB. But if it jumps up and becomes a perspective when you add that human element to it. For millions of TB patients, how would the post-COVID world look like? Would it be back to normal for them? And what happens if they are not given treatment at this point of time? Is there a silent epidemic brewing in the future? So all of that, when you hit that human element up, it immediately becomes a perspective piece. We'll discuss a little bit about what popular science writing is, which is where a science-backed or a evidence-backed perspective will fall, not strictly, but since we are talking about scientists writing perspectives, yes, it would surely for scientists, it would surely fall in the genre of popular science writing. So, what is the difference between a perspective piece and popular science writing, or popular science writing and academic writing? And I discuss this at every forum that I go to with scientists. It really opens up our world to a new way of thinking, a new way of addressing things. So, in popular science writing, you will see that more often than not, the newsy bits, things that would be of interest, of contemporary interest to people, really spring up. And they are the ones that are catered to by way of popular science writing. You may have read a number of popular science books. One of them is there on your screens, The Gene. If you haven't read, I do recommend you go ahead and read that. Similarly, Rebecca Skloot's The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Similarly, Michio Kaku's many books around physics. Some of my favorite authors, but they give you an insight into what perspective writing might be, what writing from the point of view of a scientist who's engaged in popular science writing means. So, a perspective or a popular science piece would really be entrenched in the here and now, like we call in our journalistic parlance also. It has to have a shelf life. It is something that needs writing today or tomorrow or within this week. So that's the major difference between academic writing and popular science writing. As we all know, scholarly communication that all of you are aware of and are involved in a day, on a daily basis almost, is where research and scholarship is created, evaluated, distributed, and preserved. That's scholarly communication for you. It also takes the traditional or formal shape of publications in journal articles, chapters, or monographs, conference proceedings, publications like data sets, data visualization, working papers, and of course the increasing, genre of blogs, where many people write evidence-backed scholarly communication. It may not strictly fall in the purview of scholarly communication yet, but it does spring out to us who are doing a lot of science communication as a new area where a lot of scholarly communication is also published, just like it is published in preprints. Now, scholarly communication to you might look something like this. It would have a broad background. In the beginning, it would have a specific background. It would have a problem statement or motivation. You would talk about the methods. You would then come to the results, find out a context of what your finding means. You have a conclusion, and of course, you talk about the implications of your research. Let's very quickly also go into the life of an academic paper. What happens when you're writing? And it's a very short video, which I really enjoy, and it may be of use to all of you, about a couple of minutes. So let's just have a look at this. Uh, Here it goes. Yeah, so you see how the life of a paper goes on beyond just academic publishing. And this video is, of course, a little old, and so the number of submissions, etc., have increased. So I have the hits to the sites. But that aside, let's go into the world of a paper, a manuscript that many of you are familiar with. The broad concept of a manuscript or how it is written is not new to you. So let's just see how that compares with popular or perspective writing. Like we discussed, your paper has all of these elements, and then if you almost flip your academic paper, your conclusion becomes the introduction for your perspective. The so what question. You've done your research, or you're writing about a research which is embedded in a lot of scientific facts and figures. So the conclusion is what people would like to know. And a perspective, when you're writing one, should really hit that conclusion up onto the top, followed by, of course, your key findings, what has been found in this particular research, its implications for the wider world, the problem that you started looking at, the context of your finding, a broad background, and voila, you have your perspective piece or a popular science piece, even a news piece, a feature piece. All of that really falls into the same category of writing. And so you see the way you approach a manuscript and the way you approach a perspective piece are not very different. It's only about jiggling up what you already know into a format that may be more popular in its outreach and communication. However, in both of these forms of writing, academic writing versus popular writing, the guiding principles are the same. The accuracy, brevity, and clarity, which we call the ABC of scientific communication, remain the same. You cannot mess with the accuracy of the findings. You cannot not be brief about what you want to say. For academic writing, as brief as possible, in as many number of words as possible, in as many figures as possible as it allows, as your manuscript allows. At the same time, for popular science writing, that brevity becomes even more concise. The wordage, the verbiage that you have for a perspective piece or a popular science piece becomes even more smaller. So brevity and, of course, clarity. You cannot mess around with, you know, concepts. You cannot be not clear in how you express yourself and convey the key messages of the scientific paper or the research to the public. Some of my most favorite slides will follow now, and people who have seen me present about these things will instantly notice that some of the core principles that guide popular science writing remain the same. And so, when we talk about perspective writing or popular science writing, the questions that I receive most often are: how do you decide what is popular? How do you decide what will click with your audiences? What makes you choose one piece of research over the other to write about? What makes one piece of research never see the light of the day in terms of popular writing? So, as you just saw in the video, there are thousands of papers that we receive at Nature. Similarly, as the front half writers of Nature or editors of the popular side of things at Nature, we also receive hundreds of you know write-ups or articles which people want to publish. They want us to look at those articles and convey to them whether they are worth our audiences, worth our time to edit and publish. So I'll take you through some of the most common things that we as editors of popular science communication, websites or newspapers or media houses would look for when people approach us with their stories, so to say. So, one of the things that springs out to us is the relevance. Stories of research that will affect people's lives in general. So, if something is talking about, say, all of us know what we're talking about now in terms of COVID-19. If it is talking about a disease that is eating up everybody's minds and souls, it's the preoccupation of most of humanity today, that story is, of course, very, very relevant and immediately will spring up to us. And we would like to tell that story. We would like to have a perspective piece that dedicates itself to some sort of way in which it impacts people's lives today in its relevance, and of course later we will also discuss its newsworthiness. So what kind of stories really fall in this category? Diseases we just discussed, new drugs, climate change, which may not be very apparent but is an emergency the world over, climate change, genetically modified food, etc. So anything that makes sense to anybody on the streets would be something of relevance. For instance, today is World Schizophrenia Day, and we know that COVID 19 has a significant to and fro with people living with mental illnesses. So, somebody writing a perspective piece from the medicine point of view of what we know till now about the links between mental illnesses and COVID 19. Is there a two-way street going between these two things? Would be of immense importance. It would be something that is relevant and immediately touches a chord with millions of people suffering from either COVID 19 or severe mental illnesses. So that is one of the cornerstones of how we decide to pick up a topic for our perspectives. Interest. Results that are interesting, unexpected, unusual, or amazing. Something that would talk of, say, a dinosaur finding, dinosaur eggs, or a new species finding. There's a new species finding even today from Mizoram, which we're going to report later in the day, and of a flower, of a new flowering species of plant. And there are archaeological findings. There's new species of mammal which was discovered earlier this month, and so All of these things, astrophysics, who am I questions, the wider cosmos, how do we all fit into it? These are really interesting to write about and discuss. Uniqueness. Is your perspective offering a unique view? Is it about something that we hear not too often? Is it something of a first or a superlative? The first space finding, the first sequencing of genomes, even in the SARS-CoV-2 variants, the first test tube babies, anything that comes first is obviously breaking news, and so therefore unique in its approach. And so any perspective that is offering that angle also leaps up. Newsworthiness, all of us know what it means. Um, Research that relates to something current, something that's emerging or is topical, and can be interesting for a number of people and for a number of reasons is worth writing about. If it involves a celebrity, we've often seen anything that is written about suddenly becomes more high impact. It suddenly becomes more relatable because people then go and read about it. If it's, for instance, a celebrity scientist resigning from some sort of a government body, more people will read it than somebody who's not so celebrated in their own area of interest or discipline. So much as we would not want to do eminence based writing, many times people are interested in the lives of the who's who, even in science. So yes, it does get written about, it does get eyeballs, it does get talked about. Of course, images, if your perspective is accompanied by a good picture or pictures, it obviously can sell that perspective even better. It makes it all the more approachable, understandable, relatable if visual communication in terms of infographics, photographs, even charts that are creatively done always get more eyeballs. We've seen that in the case of COVID-19 as well. Anything that we have to read, say 500 words of, will not get that many audiences or eyeballs as much as something that is visually appealing. A chart, a graph, we all know the curves by now, and we all are very familiar of with terms like flattening the curve or the peaks, etc. Even a common man knows about these things now. So images, graphics, something that tells a story more than it hides, something that is upfront and appealing always makes for great perspectives. If we have time, we can go into a more detailed view of perspective values, why they are important, why you should be, as the scientific community, writing about them. We discussed some of this earlier, but here is a very short snapshot of why a perspective should be written and why now. Timing is very important. Its social, economic, political, and human angles are significant and important. The local interests, if there are local scientists, for instance, a story that is emerging in, say, Kolkata for your audiences is much more important to local scientists and has much more local cascades than a story that is happening in perhaps Colorado in the US. So that, of course, is of interest. You might want to pick up things that are of more immediate and local interest. A surprise, we've talked about that. If it is affecting a huge number of people or is of gigantic scales, that makes for numbers, superlatives, fastest, strongest, uh, you know, the most rigorous, whatever. That kind of superlatives always make for scale and drama and excitement, action, and of course some entertainment as well along the way. Uh, there's scandal and crime as one of the things that also makes for interesting storytelling. but more often than not, you don't want to indulge in that or become part of that. But yes, these are great ways of telling stories as well. For instance, forensics makes for great, thrilling pieces around scientific perspectives. So we can pick things which talk about crime and how to solve them. We can talk about scandals. We can talk about all of this laced with evidence and backed by a strong scientific background. So, well, some of these things are very natural strengths of popular science perspective pieces like timing, significance, all of this. But some of them are not always very apparent to public, and you can, as writers or as purveyors of science, can make them more apparent to people by your writing. Here is a very short list of how we can write better perspective pieces. Since this was intended more to be a hands-on workshop, I thought I should compile some key elements that you can consider for writing a perspective piece. You can take a screenshot of this, or maybe we can discuss this during the question answer sessions if that is useful. I'll end my short talk with something that I can't advocate enough for you to read. The Elements of Style by Strunk and White, written in 1935, but very much, in vogue in its content even today, and very much used by practitioners of scientific communication the world over. It's free to download online. You'll find a PDF very easily. Not a very huge book, so a very tiny read, but worth reading if you haven't read it already. What I can come to is rule number 16, which is very dear to me from Strunk and White's Elements of Style. It says, omit needless words in any form of communication. Vigorous writing is concise. A sentence should contain no unnecessary words. A paragraph, no unnecessary sentences. For the same reason that a drawing should have no unnecessary lines and a machine no unnecessary parts. This requires that not that the writer make all sentences short or avoid all detail and treat subjects only in outline, but that every word tell. The greatest writers, Homer, Dante, Shakespeare, or even the greatest science communicators, are effective mostly because they deal in particulars and report the details that matter. In essence, their words are the ones that will call up pictures. So a word that is worth 1,000 words. Thank you.
Thank you, Shubhra. Thank you. So, I guess we have quite some time for some questions. Let's take questions from the participants here first, and then we'll just check on the live if we have any questions there. Uh, I don't see anything on the chat yet. So, you can put down your questions on the chat, or you can raise a hand and you can directly ask. So, and about that last slide, I did take a screenshot of that one, and I'll share it with the participants after this. And I also took a screenshot of the manuscript writing and perspective writing flip because I mean, I remember I had seen that slide of yours when I had just begun science writing, and I still follow that slide as the guiding principle behind, when I'm writing my research papers and when I'm doing an article. Um,
Lovely.
Okay, I'll just check on the live if we have any questions.
Sure.
I had a question.
Oh, yeah, Apeksha, go on. Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, ma'am, for such enlightening session. My question was from the slide, the super short, handy checklist for writing well. Would you please elaborate the points a bit more, if possible?
Most certainly.
Thank you.
Let me call that screen up then. Checklist goes. Okay, can you see this screen?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So yes, when you want to present your thoughts, it's best that you call up the most important ones. And I say three at most because that's the most your audience will have an appetite for from the word go. So if you have some messages to be delivered, it's better that you do them upfront and prepare those three key messages right at the start. You want to simplify, you know, uh, your entire communication. In a perspective, you want to write something which is comprehensible, which is understandable by somebody who's in the ninth grade as well as somebody, who's your grandma's age, for instance. And that's the most common analogy we offer when we're talking about science writing. So simplify as much as possible, and beyond a point, it may not be uh, possible to simplify, but you want to then put those technical words in a bracket and then sort of explain them outside of the bracket. Think of the implications of your research or the research you are talking about. What could be the possible ways in which it could, go beyond that research and have an application in the real world or an implication on people beyond just the scientific community? You can always craft some effective analogies or metaphors into your writing. For instance, you can talk about, you know, the size of the population, the size of Calcutta, or the size of a 1 rupee coin. Or, when I went to, for instance, cover the tsunami in Andaman and Nicobar Islands during the seaquake of 2004, uh, people would come and tell me, the tribal people would come and tell us uh, how far did the water recede back into the ocean when you asked them, or what was the height of the wave that you saw? They would not tell you like so and so many meters. They would tell you the height of 25 coconut trees, one on top of the other. So that's an analogy that really, sort of stuck is stuck in my mind forever. you know and it is so real because people in the islands will understand immediately if you tell them the story or the perspective through that analogy. So the cultural analogies, the metaphors that make sense for your audience would be good to use in your perspective. What are the contextualizing facts of this perspective? Why did you decide to write about it? Why did you decide to write about it now? What else has been written about in this area of science or perspective? What are the limitations or the caveats? What are the important things to mention upfront in the perspective piece? Has it been done in humans, or is it just restricted to mice, for instance, about a scientific study? How much do we know about it in real world terms? What are the limitations of this kind of research that you're talking about? Where does the theoretical aspect and where does the practical aspect begin? All of that may make for interesting anecdotes and also citations inside your perspective. You have to be, as we all know, very careful with statistics. We all know how we can't, correlation and causation are not the same thing. We all know what statistical significance means and how to portray that in a perspective piece, etc. If we don't know about statistics while we are writing about it, we want to get informed before writing about it. So we have to be very careful about how we talk about statistics. Even if we know about them, very likely that the audience may not. And so it's very important for us to convey those statistics in a manner that may be understandable. Just as the human side of science is very appealing, we talked about it, so is statistics when humanized. So we talked about things like how can you put a number to a malady or something that is evolving? How can you talk about people being affected in millions and it really makes sense to several people, or not just in your scientific community, but even a layperson who might uh, come into that story today and see the human side of that story. So that is important. Telling the human side of science is important from the perspective of the scientist. What led those scientists to ask that question? What led them to be interested in that subject? What led to the eureka moment in science that you're talking about? What led, for instance, to them, looking into the research from the point of view of a specific community or in a specific place, or what did it mean many times to their family life also makes for interesting perspectives. There are stories about how science consumes many times the life of scientists, and they are very interesting to pull out and talk about in your perspective pieces. So, does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am. So regarding the last point, so how to strike a balance between the human side of science and its hardcore facts and findings? Like we would not want to overdo either of those. So how to navigate between
Yeah.
the two?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really valid, concern to talk about, and we always struggle very hard with how much should a perspective piece really, or a popular science piece, really talk about the human aspects. But more often than not, the pieces you write or the articles you write from the point of view of a vast majority of your audience strike a chord than when you write from about it from purely the perspective of facts and figures. So as I said, uh, a cut and dry piece can be peppered with human stories. I mean, I'm talking purely from the perspective of an editor here, because that's how we look at it, right? We would try to look at hardcore facts and science from the angle of somebody who is not so acquainted with that science, or somebody who doesn't have a great understanding of that discipline of science. So when I am approaching that subject, I'm always thinking in terms of how much strictly speaking, non-science should get into that piece, like your concern. So I think storytelling is all about the fine balance between the two in science, science storytelling. So when you bring in, say, a huge lot of numbers, and that happens to a lot of stories that involve, say, modeling of COVID-19, for instance, or talking about the fatality rates of COVID-19. If you don't put the faces to those numbers, it won't it won't really be appealing as a story. It won't really be telling the story to somebody who's already seen so many deaths around them, and you know, 30 lakhs or 3 million is not a number they would be excited about. You know, out of that 3 lakhs, what is the human face of that 3 lakh? Even if you tell three stories out of those 3 lakhs, it makes sense for them. So yeah, very, very succinctly, yet with the backbone of evidence, as I keep saying. If you pull in these human stories into your narrative, it makes sense. There is no really ratio that you can say is a great mix of the two. You know, you just have to be very conscious of not diluting the science, as well as conscious of not diluting the human angle in the two. In a very convoluted manner, did that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, Kevin, you had a hand raised.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Good afternoon, ma'am. My question is, so you added in your session that we fetch a topic based on the relevance of the topic, and you added some examples like diseases, drugs, climate change, and all. So my question is, if somebody is asked to fetch a single topic, so that relevance, that the degree of comparison, or the fetching of that relevance from some existing relevant topics, how you fetch one single topic, like, or how will you rate which one is relevant, because that is a personal perspective, right? So what I found relevant may not be the one which you may be finding that thing is relevant. So it is based on the author's perspective, or based on the pulse of the audience?
Mostly both ways. It is, I mean, not the authors, but the editors, perhaps, I would say, because
Okay.
they are the gatekeepers of what the audience wants and what the scientific community is feeling, right?
Hmm.
So the
Yeah.
pulse of the scientific community and the pulse of the audience, the midpoint or the sweet soft is your editor. So they will perhaps be in a better position to gauge what will click with their audience, as well as what is emergent and should be told and relevant and should find space in their publication. So yes, to answer your question, it is a mix of both. A perspective is very personal, yes, you're very right, but what is relevant may not be very personal,
Hmm.
from the point of view of not just the author, but also from the point of view of the readers. Many times, and there's a whole debate to be had about what is relevant for a popular media. There are TRP games, there is the economics of mass media, there's the commerce that goes behind deciding what stories may be relevant today. There's commerce that decides the tone and texture of our perspectives in popular media, but the same may not apply to scientific publications or popular medium related to or attached to scientific publications, such as Nature India. I mean, we may not view at topics in terms of whether it is making a political um, message, or is
Yeah.
it biased towards one side or not. So we will go with the science most often, and we will
Hmm.
also go with what is current and relevant. So both sides have equal, and sometimes one side might be tilted more towards the other, more than the other, but we strive and make a nice balance between these two when we do our
Hmm.
stories.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay, I think Akshata had raised her hand. Akshata, you can go next. I don't see her on the call. Did she get logged out? Akshata, are you still on the call? Okay, no.
Okay, I can see Sakshi's hand up.
Yeah, okay, yeah, no, Sakshi is on this up. Sakshi, you can go. Okay, what?
Yeah,
There's a
Sakshi has
question on
left.
this. I think
Shraddha has raised her
actually
hand.
Yeah, people are facing connectivity issues. So, does anybody else here have a question, or there's one on the chat? In that case, I'll take that one.
You go ahead, and at the end, if there are no more questions, I have some comments and questions to make.
Okay. So, basically, the one on the chat is, I mean, on the YouTube live thing, it's not really directly related to your I mean, today's topic, but it's more of a general question. So Abhishek Jain has asked that for students in bachelor's and students currently pursuing bachelor's and master's degree, what would be some good platforms for gaining some experience and some training in science communication and build their skills? I'm sure standard
Um,
question you get everywhere.
Yeah, very true. But I think there are some, I mean, as opposed to a couple of years back when I had to say, write to me, there are so many more options available today, especially in India. India Biosciences does offer undergrads and postgrads and, PhD students quite a good platform to express your views and write pieces, popular science pieces, as well as pieces around your own disciplines. So that is one. There is the popular media, Indian Express, the Hindu, the print, some other organizations now have strong science communication activities. And so you can look at those. Nature India, of course, is available to you if you have a nice, strong pitch. You can always send it to me, and I'll be happy to have a look at it. And of course, beyond this, I would say writing really depends a lot on and harnessing your writing skills and honing them really depend a lot on how much you've read. And the more you read popular science communication, the more you understand the various genres, styles, platforms, you just get sucked into it more and more. So I would say keep reading at the undergrad and postgrad level. It's very important that you understand the style, the platforms, and the modes in which you can write. So I think the first step for all of you who are just beginning should be reading and then acquainting yourself with the styles of science communication. And it's not just writing, you can do it in so many formats today. You can do visual communication, like I said, in terms of audiovisual videos. Podcasts are a great area emerging now. There's science illustrations, there's photography, there's so many more new avenues coming up. So pick what's most interesting to you.
Yeah, thank you, Shubhra. So Sakshi had got disconnected. She has just put her question in the chat. So she's asking if you could touch upon a few more examples of, humanizing statistics.
Sure. Um, so one of the examples that immediately comes to my mind is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've talked about that example, of course, but that is what is consuming our minds right now, even as science writers and communicators. This is, as they say, the science communicators' moment under the sun, COVID 19. We have been harping about the need for more communication in the sciences, the health sciences, etc., forever. And we've now got a moment. I mean, I shouldn't say it's an opportunity, it's such a dreaded opportunity to have, but it is something that has really hit us hard and yet given us this scope to express through our scientific pieces so much. And I have another whole rant to make on whether it is making any dent or not in the popular minds, but that's for another day. What
We
I
have
want to
time. We
say,
have time, Shubhra. You can go on if you into it a little bit if you want.
Well, maybe I'll come to it later. But first, let me answer her question directly about humanizing statistics. So every number, every graph, every figure that you can think of in statistics will have some way of projecting them in human terms. So, for instance, if you have, you know, let's just talk about the production of baby food, and the chemicals that are found in baby food that may not meet the standards laid out, prescribed by the World Health Organization or the FAO or whatever bodies regulate the baby food industry. Now, if you just say that these many packets of baby food were produced in 2021 or 2020 that did not adhere to baby food standards, or the composition was not up to the mark, and it had adulterated mix of chemicals, etc. And these were the chemicals that came in. There were 15 chemicals that were found inside 17 baby food items in 29 countries, for instance. Throw those numbers at your audience and then say, you know, baby Tanvisha in a small village in, say, Gurgaon, near Gurgaon in Delhi, died of, poisoning because, or chemicals present in baby food um, when she was just 6 years old. Now, throw all those statistics in your story and say just this one story. What appeals to you more? And then back that story with how many million of children are consuming that kind of baby food on a daily basis. Go a little further. Talk about prenatal, you know, diagnostics for women who have, there's so much going on in fetal contamination, fetal um, at the stage of the fetus. There is so much toxic element going into the baby's bodies, simply because moms are subjected to so many kinds of chemicals in their environment, in their prescription drugs, or in even in what they eat. So go a step further and humanize that story. So what I'm trying to suggest is, I mean, this is just one of example, but there could be several such examples that talk of statistics on one hand, but bring it down to the level of real human experiences because of those statistics. I talked about the statistics of tsunami or earthquakes or similar such climate induced phenomena, you know, climate change emergency induced phenomena. And so we see that whenever we talk about climate change in terms of just the recommendations of the IPCC, or what happened at the last conference of parties, uh, we are just talking about policy level stuff, or we are talking about white papers, or we are talking about how countries are behaving. When we try and humanize those stories, we will talk about these sinking islands that were there on the face of earth 10 years back or 20 years back or 50, or 100 years back, but no longer exist. What happened to the people on those islands? They are not mere statistics, they are humans. And they these stories really jump up at you and make sense for a wider readership. So does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am, totally. Thank you so much.
I think Shraddha has her hand raised. So, Shraddha, if you could go next. Shraddha, are you still on the call?
You muted.
Okay, I'm not sure if Shraddha is still on the call. So, Anindita, we could take your question meanwhile.
Yeah, Shubhra. So I was thinking that we are talking about perspective writing and what sells and what appeals to people. So suppose you are the editor, and we have you have two people who are interested in writing a perspective. While one of this is about something controversial. For example, during this COVID-19 times, we have seen a lot of cases where people are peddling pseudoscience in the name of science and treatment for COVID and stuff like that. So something which is currently in the public news about somebody saying something which is obviously pseudoscience, versus there is another one which is about some breakthrough scientific research. And if I have to make a choice between the two, as an editor, which would you pick?
Scotching pseudoscience versus talking about science. That's what you want me to verify.
Yeah.
Okay. So why would I miss out on any of these? I would pick both. Uh,
No, in the sense, sometimes people, not maybe for your kind of reporting space, but at times you can say, can I only have one opinion piece a day? And then what would I choose?
I would I would put the other piece for the next day. I mean, it's as easy as that. So um, so perhaps but yeah, to answer your question, well, how do we weigh one piece over the other? And in terms of its currency, I mean, given the importance of both of these things are equal, given that none of this should miss the popular narrative and discussion or debate, um, I would perhaps immediately pick the pseudoscience piece, because I'll tell you my rationale behind it. The rationale for me to pick that piece would be uh, that in today's day and age, one of the most important reasons why we do science communication is to scotch pseudoscience in real time. Uh, Science has a shelf life. I can talk about that breakthrough maybe tomorrow as well, and it won't lose its steam. But pseudoscience, not countered in real time, has a deadly and many times fatal effect, like we have seen in the COVID-19 pandemic. Uh, Pseudoscience travels faster or at the same pace as scientific information does. WHO may make a great video about use of masks, but if somebody or some group has made a video which talks about a Chinese conspiracy theory, or use of drink up disinfectants to get rid of COVID-19, you will be surprised that people will share that faster and more than the WHO guidelines video. So just to make my point, pseudoscience has a real-time effect. It could kill. Science, on the other hand, breakthrough science, if it is, can still be told tomorrow or day after, or, as I said, has a shelf life. But scotching pseudoscience, to my mind, is of prime importance, not just by science communicators, as we have seen, by also scientists and healthcare providers, healthcare communicators, people in positions of power. Otherwise, we all know what a skewed narrative, not just in popular science media, but also on social media, can do to the uh, emerging story. So I hope, Anindita, you'll be convinced and pick the pseudoscience scotching over talking about science. We've stopped everything in the last 1 year. And all we are doing, 75% of our time, is to say, do not believe hydrochloroquine will improve your COVID condition. Do not get into the trap of plasma therapy. Please do not go and get ivermectin. Don't hoard these medicines. This is all we have been saying 75% of our time. 25% of our time, we've been saying, well, if you take one dose of this vaccine and the other dose of that vaccine, science now has enough evidence to say it works. Things like this that you don't, even today we don't know, right? But there is enough evidence to prove many things that we didn't know yesterday. Science is evolving so fast, but even then, we are as a scientifically bent organization. I must say, we would print both stories on the same day. I mean, there would be no choice for us, a breaking news story as well as a scorching pseudoscience story. But since your question was more oriented towards the popular media, I think they would rather go for the pseudoscience story today and the science story tomorrow.
Thanks, Shubhra. I am so glad that we think on the same lines because most of us have been busting hoaxes throughout the pandemic. And it's
Yes.
nice because, one of the sessions that I am planning with the participants as a hands on session is actually on this. On
Okay, good.
Mythbusters, and because I
Right.
really think that it's very, very important that as scientists you should not be just communicating uh, the research, but also have a responsibility towards society in busting such hoaxes, because that does, as you
Totally.
said, it travels faster and does much more damage and can even kill. A new science story will not kill anybody, so that can
Yeah,
wait.
I mean, absolutely. And it's not just scientists, Anindita, I can tell you, as people who have been entrenched in science communication, uh, despite the fact that we may be getting just a couple of hours of sleep every night these days, for the last so many months, I don't know how many and when it will end. But even then, whenever there's a piece of misinformation coming in, we have done our bit, and I am associated with a number of platforms, host busting platforms, including the Google News initiative. There's something called Fit and Fact, where we, as a bunch of hoax busters from Asia, we have ganged up together and doing this in real time. So we take turns and sit up nights whenever needed to do this, and to look at Google in real time and see what kind of myths are pervading on on social media, on just a simple Google search, what kind of things are thrown up to us, and then we go back and collate these things. And through the Google News initiative, we are doing all of this. So yes, can't emphasize its importance and need in these times enough.
Thank you. I had another question of a slightly different kind. Again, while you're writing a perspective, um, how much are you allowed to take sides?
You are allowed to debate. You are allowed to discuss. You are allowed to be controversial. Yes, you are. All of it has to be backed by science. I mean, at least for my kind of perspective writing or my publication, whatever has a backbone of science, you can assume a tone that is controversial, that is debatable, that is taking the discourse forward in the in a sentimental sense. Uh, if you can stay clear of jingoism, if you can stay clear of you know a non-scientific approach to debate, then perhaps you can be as controversial as you want, or as human and sentimental as you want.
Thank you. I'm done, Arunita. By the way, some listeners on YouTube are complaining of some background noise.
Exactly. I have been seeing that, but everybody's mic other than Shubhra's is muted. Uh, they've kind of been saying that for the last 10 minutes or 10, 15 minutes or so. Um, I
Let
don't
me
know.
try mute.
Yeah, now it's like all quiet. I mean, I'm not getting any background noise.
Yeah, I don't think it's in the meeting. Something is happening in the broadcast. I don't understand what.
Rahul, just check the broadcast.
Anyway, we can go on and again we can upload the recording.
Yeah, that's what. So, I mean, the live streaming always has, some issues with it. So we're just kind of going to replace the meeting recording with that. Um, okay. So anybody else has any questions? Mm, uh, Kevin, I still see your hand raised. Do you have another question?
No, 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 actually.
Oh, okay, okay. So I guess it's just from the earlier one. Okay, I think I have like one small question, kind of not exactly a question, but I would kind of like you to touch upon this from an editor's perspective. So just connecting the morning session and this session, there was some discussion in the morning session about how, uh, like long sentences is so as an editor, do you have a blanket rule against all long sentences, or when it's an opinion piece or a perspective piece, I mean, I'm just saying based on my reading of articles, and also when I tend to write, I feel like that, if it's an opinion piece, if it's a perspective piece, I tend to write long sentences. But then if it's a like it's a research paper, it's a science news story just on one research paper, then I mean, I try and break it down to smaller sentences. But yeah, as an editor, if you could just touch upon this, because this was about perspective writing. So yeah.
Sure. So yeah, uh, I have a thumb rule that says for headlines, not more than 7, 8 at most. The longest I've done is, I think, and these days headlines are getting bigger and bigger. That's 12 words, not more than that. But for sentences, I think we were taught in journalism school to not go beyond 25 words in a sentence. That is the ideal length uh, at most. The best sentences are between 12 and 14 words, and can convey as much as a 25 words sentence can convey, according to me. No set rules, but when you write your sentences, read them out to you is my thumb rule. Read them out to yourself. If you're feeling any break somewhere, it's worth cutting down. If you're feeling it's not flowing nicely when you speak that sentence out, it's worth cutting out. Even if it's, two words, one after the other, which are difficult to pronounce together, worth cutting out. As a thumb rule, I think that always works, has worked for me to become more concise in my writing and to edit out words which could be a stumbling block when I'm speaking. So, yeah. And always end and is replaceable. You can always replace an end with a full stop.
Yeah, that was nice. So basically, accuracy, brevity, clarity. Yeah,
That's true.
we basically keep the ABC in mind, and I guess we should be fine. Okay, so this has been a really nice session. Thank you, Shubhra. I think if anybody else doesn't have any questions, should we just wrap this up? Um, and I'm hoping there are no other questions on the live. Rahul, Alekhya, Srujana, are there any questions on live? My live is not refreshing, so I can't check. Okay, I don't think there is anything there. They would have put it on the chat here. Okay, so if all the participants also do not have any questions, I think we'll just, so could all of you just switch on your video so that we could take one group snapshot? Um,
So, if are there any more questions?
no, I mean, everybody is pretty quiet.
Okay, so thank you, Shubhra. It was a real pleasure listening to you all over again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh,
Very
Ma'am,
nice
can
talking
you
to
get your video on? Oh, but then you're outside. Um, okay, she's muted.
Sorry, the connection
Uh,
is not very good
oh,
because it's
yeah, there.
raining. Yeah.
Right. Okay, yeah, I have everybody. Just 1 second. Yes, I have got it. Thank you. Thank you, Shubhra. Thanks a lot. And thank you for taking time out from your schedule for doing this because you I mean, we know for a fact that you're a really busy person, and yes, it's difficult to get you.
Not
So
at all.
yes.
I'm always available. Not busy at all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, bye bye then. And
Thanks, Anna.
so I guess you people, the participants, can just you can keep this locked in. The next session starts, I think, half an hour later, from 5 o'clock. So you
Yeah, so
can.
just before we all leave, I just
Hmm,
wanted to make a comment on this. I was thinking about Shubhra's
hmm,
talk and the talk in the morning.
hmm,
And I am hoping that a lot of you have noted the common theme. Though they have spoken on very different topics, and in many cases, you would not think that they have said the same things. But when once it comes to, like Shubhra said, read out the sentence to yourself, and Professor Gadakar
exactly.
was saying, write for yourself. If you
Right.
like it, then it's okay. Or she was saying, split the sentence if it does not sound okay to you. So at the end of it, you are the first editor for whatever you are writing. Another thing that she highlighted and he highlighted is the importance of reading.
Right.
Your writing improves as your reading gets better and better. So there's absolutely no alternative to reading and reading widely. And I thought a very nice connection, the third nice connection between what they were saying was that, when you are writing anything, each word counts. So whether you're writing a small sentence or a long sentence or what kind of grammar check you're using, finally you should not have any redundancy in your text.
Hmm.
So each word should be, required for the sentence, whether you write a 15 word or a 25 word. So I thought that was
Exactly.
a very nice connection between the two talks, which just happened inadvertently. We didn't plan for it,
We didn't
but
plan.
it's a nice way to wrap up this session before you begin the hands-on session in the
Right.
evening.
I think they're
Okay,
going to
so
come across a bunch of such
I'm
connections
sure there
like
are going
over
to
the
be,
course
because
of the workshop.
finally there are some key points in good writing and key points in bad writing at the end of the day.
Right at the end of the day.
Okay, I will log
Uh,
off for now and I'll try
hmm,
to join if possible
okay.
once I am settled there. Okay.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
So, and I guess I'll see all of you at 5. Next session starts at
5
5
o'clock.
p.m. Yeah,
Yeah.
right, 5 p.m. So, okay, bye bye.